Well, good morning. Glad you're here this morning. I'm glad I'm here this morning. We're going to dive into a study on the study of peace. Now, been traveling all week. I was out of town for work and tried to work this lesson as I could. And I'm telling you that because in case the lesson is bad, maybe I've gained some sympathy. And maybe you won't be so hard on me. We get started here. I understand the elders' goal here is to, obviously we want to talk about family. I think Michael's doing a study on fruit of the spirits. And so you'll find this study maybe raising your eyebrows, like what does this have to do? So this is going to be a study of peace, okay, which is definitely going to be something of a Christian value that we need to have in ourselves and teach all of our young ones and our youngins also. So with that, let's just go ahead and see what we can come up with here. Now, the one thing I did want to mention is the idea that if you look at the Old Testament versus the New Testament, we understand it's the same God, same plan, and so forth. If that's for me, tell them I'm not available. But the Old Testament, you see where Israel is constantly fighting and struggling physically, right? Territory, you read the book of Joshua, Exodus, Judges. Israel's constantly battling in war against her enemies and so forth. But then when you move to the New Testament, you see where there's more talk of spiritual warfare. As we have here in 2 Corinthians 10:3-6, Paul says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh." See how this is all changed. "For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds," and so forth. Ephesians 6, where Paul talks about putting on the whole armor of God, that metaphorical speaking about arming yourself against the devil. He says, "We do not wrestle against flesh and blood," in Ephesians 6:10-17. So the New Testament more of a spiritual warfare, and the Old Testament more as a physical warfare going on here. So as we talk about this idea of peace, the Greek word used is eirene, which is the translation peace. Now what's good about this study is we look at Deuteronomy 20 and Luke 10, is that we know the New Testament's written in Greek, Luke especially, is this Greek word eirene, and it's also used in Deuteronomy in the Septuagint, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So that Greek word peace, eirene, is used in both. So that helps us out a lot when we talk about that. Another thing to mention is that the warning here to everyone is that when you try to compare Old Testament passages with New Testament passages, you got to be very careful, right? You got to understand the context of what's going on. You can't just totally put them together. So as we do this study, you won't find these parallels exactly fitting, but Deuteronomy 20, Luke 10 is studied just to kind of compare and contrast, you see, and it gives us a good area to study. Now, I wanted to study Luke 10 because later on is where Jesus is going to talk about the Good Samaritan, which I want to spend some time on that in the future, Lord willing. Okay, let's see here. I think we can now fire it up and go. So in this lesson, we're going to go over, this is going to be kind of the outline, the introduction, which I've already accomplished, check mark. Then we're going to talk about approaching your enemies with peace, the welcoming city, the unwelcoming city, and expanding the kingdom. Now, my goal is to, and I won't get into Luke 10 today for many reasons, but mainly I don't have it prepared. So today we're going to look at Deuteronomy 20, but my goal is to use this same outline for Luke 10. And when we talk about next week, Luke 10, we're going to be able to compare and contrast this with Deuteronomy 20. Yay! Okay, so let's look at the first topic, approaching your enemies with peace. Deuteronomy 20, 1 through 3. When you go out to war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army larger than your own, you shall not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you. This, of course, will be Yahweh and then Adonai, right? Is with you, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And when you draw near to battle, the priest shall come forward and speak to you, and you shall say to them, this is what the priest shall say, Hear, O Israel, today you are drawing near for battle against your enemies. Let not your heart faint, do not fear or panic or be in dread of them. So here we have this idea in Deuteronomy 20 where the priests are the ones who's going to really prepare all of Israel for battle on a spiritual level. Now, one of the things I do want to mention here is that you'll find this odd because here in Deuteronomy 20, they're talking about really an offensive war, okay? Because it says here, when you go out to war against your enemies, so forth. So scholars believe that this is almost the prescription for offensive war. Okay, what's the best defense? Offense. So the question is, why would Israel even wage war outside of Canaan, of that promised land, right? So I come up with three, and you guys may have more. One of them I thought about is a defensive war, right? As I just said, the best defense is a good offense, right? So if you have a city near your border that's acting up, it's pagan, it's influencing, you may want to conquer it and get rid of it. Number two might be retaliation, right? Maybe this city outside that keeps coming over and messing with people, you know, taking yard signs out of yards and stuff. So we don't know exactly. These are just things. And then number three, I thought of expansion of influence. So maybe these cities that lie on the border of Israel, Israel wants to be able to make sure that that city doesn't influence the other cities within the promised land too. So again, this Deuteronomy 20 may be used more as an offensive war. Now look at verse 1. When you go out to war against your enemies, you're going to see three things: horses, chariots, and a large army. Now, why would that bring fear to Israelites? I throw that to the audience. They didn't have any of that, did they? They didn't have horses, they didn't have chariots, and they surely didn't have a large army. So God knows how we are, right? So He knows these things. And so He can foresee that when man sees these things, that he's going to obviously be afraid. Let's see, I think I can find this. Let's go to Exodus 14, I think. If you go to Exodus 14, this is when they're crossing the Red Sea. I'm going to look at verse 8. 14, verse 8. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, And he pursued the people of Israel, while the people of Israel were going out defiantly. Okay, they were not afraid, they were very defiant. That's verse 8. Now, look at verse 10. When the Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching against them, and they feared greatly. See how that changed? Just within a couple of verses there, your heart can change. So here we have the priest preparing these people that when you see these things, don't get all upset about it. Now this also, if we go back to Deuteronomy 17, talks about this idea, starting in verse 14. When you come into the land that the Lord your God has given you, and you possess and dwell in it, and say, I will set a king over me like all nations around me, you may indeed have a king over you whom the Lord God will choose. One from among your brothers shall be set as king. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt to acquire many horses. So it was always, God always told them, don't get many horses. Why is that? Well, you're to rely on the Lord, not horses, not chariots, not a large army. Okay? These are some more in Joshua 11:4. I think I have that here. Joshua 11:4 says, and they came out with all their troops, a great horde in great numbers, like sands that is on the seashore, and very many horses and chariots. So it's always mentioned here that the enemy is always, we would say, technologically more advanced than the Israelites. Joshua 17:16, the people of Joseph said, the hill country is not enough for us, yet all the Canaanites who dwell in the plain have chariots of iron. Not only chariots, sometimes the Bible is going to mention chariots of iron in both Belshan and the villages and those in the valley of Jerel. Now, this doesn't mention horses, but obviously if you have chariots, you got to have horses, right? You're not going to have people run out in the battle pulling these chariots. Judges 1:19, the Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country, but he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron. So this kind of is the question, is what did Israel have if they didn't have horses, chariots, and a large army? God, right? They had God. Now, one thing I thought of as I was doing this lesson is that they had something else, and I would say a reputation. Because, so we might say, if you'll allow me, God is 99 and 44 100ths, but maybe 56 100ths might be reputation. And I was thinking about, you remember Rahab in Joshua? I think it's Joshua 2, verse 8. Well, let's see. Let me just get on down. She says, for we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond Jordan, to Sidon, to Og, whom you devoted to destruction. As soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and earth beneath. So maybe reputation helped the Israelites as well, but still all is because of God, you know, in that sense. Okay, any questions, comments, concerns? If you don't want to speak it, write a letter, and I'll give you my address. Okay, let's look at these verses here, 4 through 9. So now they've already been told to don't be afraid. You're going to see many horses, chariots, and armies. The priests are to go out and spiritually uplift and encourage the Israelites. 4 through 9. For the Lord your God, there's that phrase again, is he who goes out with you to fight for you against your enemies, to give you victory. Then the officers shall speak to the people, saying, so priests have spoke, now the officers are going to speak. Is there any man who has built a house and has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in battle, and another man dedicate it. And is there any man who has planted a vineyard and has not enjoyed its fruit? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in battle, and another man enjoys his fruit. Is there any man who has betrothed a wife and has not taken her? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in battle, and another man take her. And the officers shall speak further to the people and say, is there any man who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go back to his house, for he make the heart of his fellow melt like his own. And when the officers have finished speaking to the people, then the commander shall be appointed at the head of the people. Now, what's the point of the officers sowing this doubt in some of the people? He was the great motivational speaker of his time, wasn't he? So it reminds me, God's trying to whittle down the army, right? Just like he's done before. And so the reason is, if you have anyone that has doubt about the Lord and the Lord's ability to give you victory, the problem is, see here in verse 8, you can make your fellow men melt like your own. Okay, you'll have influence over these other people. If they see you running from battle, they're going to run from battle. So they wanted that to be done away with. So the officers, which we assume are the military commanders, you see, they understand they want good, dedicated warriors to go out. Now, let's see, I think I have here. Now, other prophets have also talked about this idea of relying on horses and chariots and so forth. I'll read. I got it written down here for you. Isaiah 30, 15 through 16. For thus says the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. Now, this is Isaiah warning them to have the right attitude. But you are unwilling, and you say, no, we will flee upon horses. See, Isaiah is accusing them that, no, when destruction comes, you think you're going to jump on horses and take off. Therefore you shall flee away. We will ride upon swift steeds. Therefore your pursuers will be swift. And so Isaiah is saying, if you think you're going to ride on horses and escape God's punishment, then God will make the enemy even faster to get you. Now, Solomon was warned too about this. 2 Chronicles 1, 14 through 17, it talks about how Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen, 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen he stationed around the area. I'm paraphrasing here, but what Solomon did was build up a huge army. Of course, we know Solomon, although he's the wisest man, made unwise decisions quite often. So throughout the Old Testament, it's always rely on God, rely on God. Now, we do know that David was a great warrior and did all this. So what is the idea here that God allowed some of that to happen? I have to say yes. I don't truly understand his will in that, but it is what it is, what the Bible gives us. Now let's talk about the next section is the as we approach with peace, the welcoming city versus the unwelcoming city. First of all, I'm going to talk about this idea of peace. Now, peace here, and even if we go back to Deuteronomy, we'll see this phrase, things like make peace, okay? Well, in essence, if you look at A&E, and A&E means, that's not a TV channel, but it means Ancient Near Eastern, okay? So what biblical scholars do is they look at, here you got Israel during this time period, but you've got Egypt, the Hittites, all these other Amorites, all these other cultures around this area, and they're all intermingling, okay? You got the city of Ugarit up in the north, and so they all typically have the same writing family, and they're all culturally somewhat similar. So what scholars like to do is also just go outside of the Bible and study other things around there just to see how they were influenced. Moses brings down the tablets from Mount Sinai, and the finger of God is written on them. Well, do they know how to read? Well, surely. So what language is it? You know, you say it's Hebrew, okay, but they have to teach Hebrew. Hebrew is a Semitic language that comes from this and that. Okay, so this idea of peace used here and in other places, you see, is the idea of a treaty. And it makes sense when you look at things like 2 Samuel 10:19, when all the kings who were servants of Hadazar saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they made peace. Well, that means they made an agreement, a covenant, a treaty with them. So here in Deuteronomy, we're talking about the same thing. Verses 10 and 11, Deuteronomy 20. When you draw near a city to fight against it, offer terms of peace. Again, offer a treaty, okay? So when you go to this city, you approach it. They got many horses, chariots, and so forth. But you've got God and yourselves walking up to the offer peace first. Offer peace first. And if it responds to you peacefully and opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall be forced labor for you, and you shall serve it. What great terms, right? If you're a city and you see Israel, you open up their gates and then you become their servants. Well, that's kind of odd, isn't it? But it's what the Bible says. And this is not totally unusual out of character as we remember the Gibeonites that tricked Joshua and the other ones, and then they became servants. Anamites did too by David, 2 Samuel. Now, what's the benefit of becoming a servant of Israel? What's the alternative? Death, right? Okay, we're going to learn here. If you don't do that, then that's what will happen. Now, as a side note, these things pop in my head from time to time. If you go back to the New Testament, you kind of understand why the Jewish people, especially the leaders, had a somewhat arrogance against them. Why they looked down on Gentiles and so forth is because they misunderstood a lot of the Old Testament when, like places like here where God says, you go to a city, offer them peace. If they accept, they're now your servants. And so there is a mentality that you can see growing in arrogance where they just thought the world should serve them because they were the chosen ones, okay? That arrogance obviously cost them a lot. The Syrian invasion, captivity in Babylon, and so forth. But I digress. So the terms are this, according here. If they decide on peace, if they decide on a treaty with you, and again, a city may do that because they know God's on their side in that reputation, okay? And maybe they know, well, you know, the Gibeonites did it and the Amorites did it, so maybe it's not so bad and it's better than death, okay? Now, this is all the people in there. Man, woman, children. They're all going to be servants. Okay, we don't really know what that means. May mean, you know, you just stay there and give us 10 sheep a year or something. We don't really know what that means. So if we summarize here, the city will open its gates. The residents will be forced labor. And everyone goes on their merry way and everyone's happy. These I've already talked about. Now, let's look at, we talked about the welcoming city. Now, here's the unwelcoming city. So, basically, they're offered one or two choices, war or peace. Okay? That seemed like a good book, don't they? War and Peace. How many people's read that? I read somewhere, you know why War and Peace is this thick? Is because Leo Tolstoy, who wrote it, they would write a chapter in a newspaper, like in Moscow, every week. Okay, and every time he did that, he got paid. So he kind of wanted to prolong. So kind of like those soap operas. Lewis, you watch them soap operas? Yeah, Young and the Restless. Young and the Restless, right? But there's no end to them, are there? They just keep right on going. Okay, I know you're thinking kind of like this lesson. No, we're going to end. Y'all just be patient. Okay, so let's stay focused here. So these are cities outside of Canaan, as we already mentioned. And these are the unwelcoming city. God says, but if it makes no peace with you, if they decide, nah, we're not going to make peace with you, but makes war against you. See, there's only two choices, peace or war. You shall besiege it. And when the Lord your God, there's that phrase, the Lord your God gives it into your hand. Okay, so the Lord's going to make you prevail. You shall put all its males to the sword. But the women and the little ones, the livestock and everything else in the city and all its spoils, you shall take as plunder for yourself, and you shall enjoy the spoils of your enemy, which the Lord your God, there's that phrase, has given you. Thus you shall do all the cities that are very far from you, which are not cities in the nation here. Okay, very important distinction here. So, welcoming city, you can make peace. You become servants of the Israelites. The unwelcoming city, you go in and what do? Kill all the males. But you don't kill the children and females. Now, why do you think you go in and kill all the males? What was that? Yeah, so they're probably the fighting people, right? The women and children are not, they're not fighting in the war quite yet. So these men are going to be the military men. They're going to be the ones that will probably be the leaders, all of them, this isn't like modern days, folks. Back here, the men made all the decisions. Well, so they say, right? We don't know what happened in the household. Okay, so the men are going to be the army, the military people. You're going to go in and kill them. And then the women and the little ones you're going to spare. Okay? And we're going to get to that in just a minute. So if you don't surrender and decide peace, then you get war. Now, one thing I did want to mention, I was reading about this, and they said that one of the reasons why you spare the women and the children, obviously, because they can grow up and without, put in daycare, right, Head Start, and then but the women were important because, for instance, they said like Aramaean women traditionally would take the religion of their husband, no matter who it is. So in some sense, the Israelites would bring these in and introduce them into the Jewish faith, you see, into that religion. Now, there's also any questions, comments on these unwelcoming cities outside of Canaan? All right, now there's actually some more here. And this is the treatment of cities inside Canaan, you see. Same thing, you're going to approach a city, peace, so forth. But if the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you, the Lord your God, giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes. You shall devote them to complete destruction, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and if you say that real fast, it makes you sound like you know how to pronounce all that stuff. The Lord your God has commanded, you may not. The reason is why? That they may not teach you to do according to their abominable practices that they have done for their gods, so you sin against your God. Obviously, your influence, right? And this here we have grown to expect, right? When they take the Joshua and stuff, when they take over the cities or to destroy everything, because God knew that they would have an influence on them. Now, we went over a few verses where that didn't happen, right? And that's one reason why that caused a lot of problems down the road. Now, interestingly, if you turn your Bibles like to Genesis 12, verse 18, all the way back to good old Abraham, it says things like this. 12:18 and following. Well, no, that's not the right one. Let's go. Oh, here it is. Joshua 12. Sorry. Joshua 12, verse 8. And in the hill country, the low country, in the Abra, in the slopes of the wilderness, the land of the Hittites, the Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites. In other words, this list is pretty persistent in the Old Testament. These same groups of people that are in Canaan is always mentioned to wipe out. But things like, if you do a search of like Hittite, you find Abraham actually bought the burial site from a Hittite, right, who owned land in Canaan during this time. So here, again, the welcoming city outside of Canaan, the unwelcoming city outside of Canaan, but in Canaan, in that promised land, when you approach a city, you shall destroy everything that breathes. Okay. Now, just holding your breath when they get there won't work. So everything that breeds, you're going to destroy everything. That's cattle, sheep, goats, no pigs, but, they probably did have pigs there. But everybody, so as not to, and he tells them explicitly here, they have a different religion, you'll be influenced, and then you'll sin. Okay, we got to get rid of it. Okay. Now let's look at this topic of expanding the kingdom. So according to Exodus 12 and Numbers 26 through 51, there was about 600,000 men. Okay, so you can double that for women. So there you got 1.2 million. But then you also got children, right? So you can put that on up to 2 to 3 million people here when they entered the promised land. And so when you start out with that's a large country at that time period, okay? That's a large population during this time period. So when I talk about expanding the kingdom, what I'm talking about is increasing the population of Israel. Okay, how did they do that? Well, they obviously intermingled with themselves, created their own population. But here they also, when they would overtake another city, especially outside of Canaan, right? When you grab those women and children outside of Canaan and you bring them back, that grows your population. When David took over Jerusalem, it talks about, because the Jebusites here is mentioned in Exodus. See if I can go here. See, it's Exodus 17, the Jebusites, those are the people in Jerusalem, okay? But it's not a conquered city yet. So when David would take over Jerusalem, I mean, it doesn't say he went in there and just killed everybody. He absorbed a lot of those into the faith. Now, it could be, but scholars have said that that's how they would increase their population. Now, a side note here is that the bloodline, you see, of the Jewish people really wouldn't become an issue until Ezra comes back from Babylon. So if you read Ezra, it talks about, the Levites have to come from this genealogy. And he lists the whole genealogy. And that's going to be more important than now. In the early days, Israel is growing not only within its own population, but by absorbing some of these women and children into their fold, expanding the kingdom, as we say here. So this was actually the last question here was, that's how the kingdom grew and expanded their empire. Now, next week, we're going to talk about Luke 10. And when we talk about Luke 10, we're going to, again, use these same points here about approaching a city. Jesus is going to send out the 70 or the 72, whichever Greek manuscript you want to use. And he's going to talk about this is how you approach cities. And we're going to compare and contrast that to what Deuteronomy talks about next week.